I'm not a victim of my genes, damn it. I'm the master of my genes because it depends on what chemistry I'm going to send to the cells, which then is dependent on what is my consciousness.
The disease is a process that manifests your life. It also means that if you gain agency over your life, you can affect the process.
These toxins are just ubiquitous.
Inescapable in the modern world today. Now, having said that, what you just mentioned is probably the most important thing that we can do.
We are on a mission to inspire, heal, and bring the world closer together. Welcome to Commune. My name is Jeff Krasno. Today on the show, we dive deep into the biology of belief with Bruce Lipton, Gabor Mate, and Alejandro Junger, three preeminent doctors. We will discuss how our environment impacts our psychology and how our psychology subsequently affects our physiology. Specifically, we will explore how stress can cause physiological imbalances that beget disease. And we will hear about the protocols that one can consciously adopt to reverse disease and foster greater balance. Now, Western medicine has been characterized by the analysis of discrete individual systems. We have myriadologists, neurologists for the brain, gastroenterologists for the gut, pulmonologists for the lungs, cardiologists for the heart, and so on and so on. Now, this type of specialization has led to fantastic medical discoveries. At the same time, it has propelled a medical paradigm that often fails to see the interconnectedness of all the systems within the body and its relationship to its environment. And we have historically separated the mind from the body. In 1632, Descartes uttered his famous axiom, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, which conflated being with cognition. Now, while Descartes was making a case for logic and reason, this notion divorced the mind from the soma. We too often feel as though we're some locus of consciousness locked up in an unintelligent bag of skin that we have, like we have a car. And like a car, something will likely go wrong with it. Now, over the past generation, we've begun to bridge the chasm between the mind and the body. We're beginning to understand that a human being is the sum total of its biopsychoorganism and its environment, and that you cannot define its function as separate from its ecosystem. Of course, we know this as a product of direct experience. A snake slithers across the floor and your heart and respiratory rate go through the roof, unless you're a herpetologist. Today's episode excavates how consciousness impacts our biology. We explore how our thoughts trigger hormones, chemical messengers that send signals to our body, and how our environment can influence our gene expression. Specifically, we probe how stress can manifest in disease. And Dr. Bruce Lipton is a pioneer in the emerging field of epigenetics. His classic book, The Biology of Belief, reshaped how we think about the interrelationship between thought and biochemistry. So without further delay, here's Bruce Lipton. For the overwhelming majority of our human history, Homo sapiens existed as hunter-gatherers, and we evolved certain adaptive phenotypic traits that comported with foraging on the Serengeti. So 200,000 years ago, Bruce and I go out and roam the savannah. We're searching for food to bring back to our clan. And all of a sudden, a saber-toothed tiger or some odd-toed horned ungulate springs forth out of the underbrush. And it's furiously running towards Bruce and I. So as a place to start, can you describe the neurobiological cascade that is triggered by the perception of threat?
Before we even get to the human aspect of this, you have to recognize something called the biological imperative. What the hell is that? And that is, it's the drive to survive. And all organisms, this is the point why it becomes critical, is organisms as the bottom organism, bacteria. they are endowed with a biological imperative, because if you try and kill a bacterium, it's not going to go, oh, okay, kill me. It's going to do everything it can to stay alive. So every living organism has a drive to stay alive. Well, in that case, it also then has an awareness of what could, compromise that alive. And then we build up an awareness of the scary things that could threaten us, so that if they show up in our world, then we're going to immediately make a response to protect ourselves. Let me just, because we might get into this later, there are two aspects to the biological imperative: survival of the individual, yourself, let's say, which is meaning why you seek air, water, food, shelter, and things like this, because this keeps us alive. The second one is also very critical, because the second part of biological imperative is survival, not of the individual, but survival of the species, which means there's a drive to reproduce to keep the species alive. So we can talk about the individual one first. Okay. So it says, when threats come into the environment, the biological imperative is the first to waken you to the threat. Okay. Where is it? Well, that's what he said. Well, in the neural system. I go, we don't even know where it is. And it was there in bacteria before there was much of a neural system. So all of a sudden it goes, boy, we don't know where it is, but we know it exists. and the relevance about that is that we all live by this biological imperative, which protects us. Okay. And then I said, well, as you said, if a threat is looming, then the biology switches its action, community, organization from growth into protection.
Mm-hmm.
And they're mutually exclusive. I'll just give you a reason why. If there's a stimulus that offers growth, you go to that stimulus, and you go with your arms open to take it in, assimilate. It's growth. It could be food, it could be love. I don't care. You open up, you go to the stimulus, open up, and take it in. That's growth. Protection, you go away from the threat and you close yourself down in protection. I say, guess what? You can't be in growth and protection at the same time. They're mutually exclusive behaviors. So when we get into protection, we shut down our openness and our growth in the world, and we start to look at, how can I preserve myself in this threat? Okay. And I say, well, how does the body make a response to this? And I go, that the hypothalamus, which interprets the signals, interprets the fact that there's a threat. And when it does that, it sends a signal to the pituitary gland. The brain, hypothalamus, says, oh, this is a threatening situation. And it sends a signal to the pituitary gland, which in high school was called the master gland, because its secretions control 50 trillion cells that are in your body. And then in a state of threat, the pituitary sends a signal to the adrenal glands, which in school was called fight or flight. And all of a sudden it says, what happens? The adrenal stress hormones go to the body and they redirect the system. They take away the energies that are involved with, like, growth, the energies involved with the immune system. And I go, why? Look, if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, bacterial infection is not your big deal at that moment, okay? Mm-hmm. And the immune system uses tremendous amount of energy, because when people get sick, sometimes they don't even have energy to get out of bed. Okay, so what are we talking about? When we get in stress, we want to allocate all the body's energy to escape. And escape uses arms and legs. So I go, the energy is where? In the blood. So I go, so what happens when stress hormones come in? They redirect the flow of the blood, and they take the blood and preferentially send it to the arms and legs, because that's where the energy is going to activate to get me out of there. And I go, well, preferentially, where was it preferentially before the stress? I go, it was in the gut, the viscera, all the organs in here. And I go, well, what were their functions? Growth, maintenance of the body, cleaning up the system, preparing the energy, taking care of the machine, more or less, okay? But at the moment stress hormones are released in the body, the blood vessels in the gut respond to the stress hormones by squeezing shut. And when they squeeze shut, that means the blood is not really going into the gut, but it's now going preferentially into the arms and legs. And that's where we want to get that energy to run. So number one, stress hormones shut down the growth mechanisms of the body. Number two, they shut down the immune system, because that's a high energy system that is not relevant to an external threat. And then number 3, which I always call the adding of insult to injury, is the blood vessels in the conscious brain are energizing conscious creativity, thinking, and action like that. But the conscious brain is a very slow processor compared to the rest of the brain back here called the subconscious brain. And the subconscious brain is not only extremely fast beyond conscious brain, but it's a million times more powerful. So what happens is, remember I told you the blood vessels in the gut constrict with stress hormones. That's where people get that butterflies in the stomach kind of feeling, queasy feeling, because what's going on? The blood vessels are all squeezing shut. You can feel them. And that's the queasiness.
Yeah.
But then the stress hormones go into the brain and they do the same thing in the conscious blood part of the brain. They squeeze the blood vessels shut. I say, so I'm not nourishing or energizing my consciousness, but when I squeeze it shut, the blood is then sent to the back of the brain where the subconscious has reflex behavior, reactions, high speed, very fast. We become less intelligent when stress hormones are there because we're not using thinking, we're using reflexes. And that's a completely different way of life. So I say, so what happens here? I say, well, growth, taking care of the body. Threat, get the energy into the arms and legs as best you can and run like hell. Get out of there. But at the compromise of what? Well, you're shutting down growth, you're shutting down the immune system, and you're shutting down intelligence. And I go, you don't need that to escape from the tiger. You just need fast arms, legs, and reflexes to make them go. I go, well, this is really great. Back, 200,000-300,000 years ago, where the only real threat we had was the saber-toothed tiger. I go, so what? I say, well, if you're running from that saber-toothed tiger and you escape 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you're gone, you're safe. Then you return back at growth again to maintain the body. Today's world, the threats are so many of them out there that we're not on stress hormones for 10 minutes. We're on stress hormones all day. And I go, what's the consequence? Well, they say all day you are inhibiting the mechanism from taking care of itself. And I say, today we have a health crisis. I go, yeah. A lot of people up until recent times said, oh, the genes are causing the disease and all this kind of stuff like that. Fact of science, less than 1% of disease is connected to genetics. I was saying, well, then we have a health crisis. Where the heck where is all this coming from? And the answer is stress. Over 90% of illness is directly loaded to stress. Why? Because it shuts down the immune system. It shuts down the growth. You're weak. And it was only for a short period, years and years ago. But today, that period of stress is extended so it's like 24/7. And I say, well, that is the major compromise of life on this planet, the fears. And I go, well, it's real interesting because the media loves to give us all the fears and manipulates us. So when you watch the news, you're just dripping stress hormones through your body, compromising yourself. And so it's a point where we have to get out of this continuous chronic connection with fear, which is everywhere on this planet. Just watch the news, surf the web, look out your window and you can see this place is crazy and everybody's trying to do what? Well, fear closes you down. Well, you can't survive. Why? Because you need to be engaged with the world and respond to everything. But if you're closing yourself down, you pulled yourself out. And that's where disease starts to begin. And it's at every level. It's like people are thinking, oh, well, cancer is caused by genes. I just love this as a fact of science. You ready? There's not one gene that causes cancer. There's no gene that causes cancer. They're called oncogenes, cancer genes. I say, well, because they used to say, well, that's the responsive thing that's responsive your cancer right there. And I go, genes do not cause cancer. What the result is that consciousness will engage those genes if we're out of harmony, if we're in a stress situation. So I say, well, then the gene didn't turn on and do that. It was the consciousness that activated that gene. So, for example, most women are very, of course, concerned about what is called the breast cancer gene. Oh, that's the gene that causes breast cancer. I say, no, it doesn't cause breast cancer. It's associated with breast cancer. Did it cause the cancer? No. It was activated by a problem. and that problem is repressed anger or repressed emotions that weren't allowed to express themselves. Then you activate the gene. We've been blaming the gene. I go, no, the gene didn't even do this. It was us. And I go, that's the difference. I say, what's the difference? I say, if you believe the gene did it, then you're acknowledging you're a victim. My genes did. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't pick these damn genes. I can't change these genes. And these genes are turned on and off by themselves according to the story, which means I'm a victim of my biology. And I go, but genes didn't do this. It was our response to the world that did this. And I go, wait a minute, our response to the world? I say, yeah, your consciousness. I go, why is that significant? Change your consciousness and the diseases can disappear. Or the consciousness can cause a disease, or a change of the consciousness can cause the disease to change. The difference is this. First story, victim of heredity. Genes did this. I'm a powerless victim. Give me drugs. The new story is I, through my disharmony, are causing a cancer, which then leads to a very simple understanding is, well, then what if I return to harmony? I go, well, then the cancer disappears. As simple as that. And all of a sudden it says, first story, victim. Second story, the new science, epigenetics, where consciousness is controlling the genes, master. So we go from victim to master with a change in the science, because now I'm going to give the power back to the people rather than saying you're a victim of your genes. You had nothing to do with it. Now I'm going, no, you're the creator of this. And all of a sudden that changes how we look at the world after how many years of being programmed to be victims. And then we find out, no, my God, we're the creators. Well, for the creators, then where the hell the issue is? And I go, well, that's the programming we have to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. God, so interesting. Okay. So many threads to pull on there. What was once an adaptive advantage, essentially, this HPA axis response to threat, has become maladaptive because of the systems and structures that we have reified in our society. So, for example, fast forward to the Serengeti of Facebook, for example, which I often call the largest non-consensual psychological experiment in history.
It is, yes, sorry, it's true.
and we're spending, especially I have three daughters, particularly teenagers, are spending an inordinate amount of time, well, not on Facebook, but on all of these platforms. And these algorithms are designed for the hindbrain, basically, to leverage negativity bias through fear and outrage in order to maximize views and watch time, et cetera. And the result is this chronic secretion of neuromodulators and hormones, like cortisol and epinephrine, et cetera, when we become very entrenched in this sympathetic overload, which I think what you're saying is having really detrimental impacts on human physiology. So I'd love to kind of dig into that mechanism a little bit. How do, let's say, we are in this constant state of low grade fight or flight, and we're having a hormonal response that is concomitant with the sympathetic response. How do our cells at the cellular level, how do we know? Why are they acting differently? How are genes turning on and off in response to serum hormonal levels?
Well, the first thing we have to understand is this. The entire belief that genes turn on and off by themselves is a totally false statement. Because by acknowledging that, then you're saying, well, I had no control over it. The genes did it, okay? But we know, no, genes are blueprints. They're there to design what are called the proteins of the body, 100,000 different proteins. The proteins are like Lego pieces that you can assemble them, the 100,000 different proteins in different combinations, make a muscle cell with one combination of proteins, a nerve cell with a different combination already. So I say, yeah, but these are the proteins that create us, and these are the proteins where life comes from. I said, but what about the DNA? I said, well, proteins wear out. That they're called labile, not stabile. Labile meaning that they fall apart. You put a piece of meat on a plate and we come back next week, that meat is not going to be the same as it was when we put it out there. It's going to start to break down, fall apart. So proteins that naturally keep falling apart, but then you have to replace them. I say, yeah, but proteins are complex molecules with a complex structure. And I go, oh, I said, well, then how do I replace these complex structures? I say, there are blueprints, a blueprint to make this protein or that protein, 100,000 proteins. I say, there are blueprints. I say, what do you call a blueprint? I go, a gene. A gene is a blueprint. I go, oh, a gene is a blueprint. And then we told people, well, they were self-emergent, which means, oh, they turn themselves on, they turn themselves off. I say, no, look, let's be honest about a blueprint. We go into an architect's office. She's working on a blueprint. You lean over her shoulder and you ask her, hey, is your blueprint on or off? And she'd look at you like, what the hell are you talking about? There's a blueprint. There's no on and off. And I go, precisely. The difference is you can read a blueprint or not read a blueprint, but the blueprint doesn't read itself. And all of a sudden I said, then for years we were saying the blueprint was turning on and off by itself, controlling you. And now we know, no, it's the consciousness that engages the blueprint. I say, how does it do it? And I say, through chemistry. Different chemicals cause different responses in genes. Matter of fact, that's what I did in 1967, which is now like 40, 50. It's a long time ago. And what did I do? I had genetically identical cells, cloning cells, and I had 3 plates with genetically identical cells in them, but I fed them different culture medium. I said, what's culture medium? Well, that's the growth environment. I go, yeah, but what is culture medium? I say, laboratory version of blood. So if I'm going to grow human cells, I say, what is human blood made out of? And then I go into the lab and with a recipe, I make culture medium match human blood. Okay. And so I go, so what? And I say, well, because I'm creating the mixture, I can change some of the composition. So I created 3 different combinations of chemistry called culture medium, slightly different. And I had 3 plates, genetically identical cells on all the plates. And what I did is I fed 1 plate with culture medium version 1, another plate with culture medium version 2, and a third with culture medium 3. And I said, well, what was the result? They were all genetically identical. I said, well, in one environment, culture 1, the cells form muscle. In environment 2, the cells form bone. In environment 3, the cells form fat cells. And I go, well, wait a minute. I'm teaching that genes control life. And here we have an experiment that reveals all these cells are genetically identical. Then what was the cause of why one becomes bone and one becomes muscle? And the answer was, it wasn't the cells, it was the environment, the culture medium. And I go, wow, that's really neat. That's the foundation of what we call epigenetics. The genes didn't control this, they were controlled by the environment that the cells were in. Okay. So I go, so what's the significance for this? I go, well, a human, when we see ourselves in the mirror, single entity. And I go, well, that's an illusion because we're made out of 50 trillion cells. The cells are the living entity. Bruce, by definition, is a community of 50 trillion sentient cells. So I go, oh, so the cells in our body is like a skin-covered petri dish. It's got 50 trillion cells inside. I go, yeah, but it also has the original culture medium. I said, what was that? Blood. And I go, then what? And I say, it doesn't make a difference if a cell's in a plastic dish or the skin-covered dish. It's still controlled by the environment culture medium. In the plastic dish, that's the one I put in there. In your skin-covered dish, your blood is your culture medium. So bottom line is this. It's the chemistry of the blood, the environment, that activates expression of the gene. And I go, now comes the most, well, where's that chemistry come from? I go, the brain is the chemist that puts the chemicals in the blood. But then comes the ultimate one that Jeff has been waiting for me to say, and that is simply this. So what chemicals should the brain put in the blood? And the answer is, whatever thought you have, the brain will translate that into complementary chemistry. There's a chemistry for love, which is a different chemistry than fear, which is a different chemistry than anger. And I go, and so basically it says this. If I hold a picture of love in my consciousness, my brain translates that into love chemistry, dopamine for pleasure, oxytocin, bonding, vasopressin makes you more attractive, keep your partner, and growth hormone, which does what it says. So if I have a picture of love in my head, I'm a healthy person. Why? Those chemicals, when in my blood, are going to enhance my vitality. That's why when people fall in love, they glow. That glow of health is not an accident, it's the result of the chemistry. But I say, but if I have a picture of fear in my head, I don't release love chemistry, as you mentioned, Jeff, just a moment ago. We start to release things like stress hormones into the blood or factors that affect the immune system to protect us and shut us down. I go, wait, the chemistry of love is totally different than the chemistry of fear.
Yeah.
But to the cells, they respond to the chemistry. So there's a behavior that's associated with love, vitality, health, and that's why love is so cool. But there's a different behavior associated with fear because it's a shutdown of the mechanism of protection, wall yourself off, save yourself, and stuff like that. And I'm going, so here's bottom line. We used to say genes control us. We're victims. We didn't pick them, can't change them. They turn on and off by themselves. The new science, epigenetics, and epi means above. So epigenetics is above the genes. That's where the control comes from. Consciousness. You change your consciousness and you change the chemistry of your blood, which then in turn changes the genetic activity.
It's quite amazing when you think about it that non-material experiences and thoughts can directly lead to the production of something material. Something scary in the external world can be decoded by the brain, assigned a valence and salience by the mind, and subsequently trigger signals that tell the body to generate cortisol, for example, a steroid hormone produced from cholesterol in the adrenal glands. This chemical regulates so many different functions around the body. It's astounding. Now, chronic stress can lead to hormonal imbalances, including both the overproduction and the underproduction of cortisol. Overproduction can undermine the immune system, disrupt the balance of gut flora, and spike glucose levels. Underproduction can lead to brain fog, fatigue, and thyroid issues. It's all connected. Of course, we're striving for balance, the Goldilocks zone, homeostasis. Balance begets ease. Imbalance leads to dis-ease. As Gabor Mate explains, we tend to misunderstand disease. Typically, we think of disease as some sort of physiological malfunction. We slap a diagnosis on a cluster of systems, and then this label guides the treatment, usually the prescription of a drug that neuters the symptoms. However, disease is a progressive process that is generally not abnormal. It's a normal and expected response of your body to external stimuli. In his extraordinary book, The Myth of Normal, Gabor directly connects trauma-inducing events with pathology in the body. But in helping us understand disease as process, he also gives us agency. Here's Gabor Mate.
At some point, something became very clear to me that as a physician, I had this idea of disease that was very static and very undynamic. And it shows up in how we use language. So we say, I have multiple sclerosis, or I have ADHD, or I have cancer. Well, that language implies something. It implies that there's this thing called ADHD. There's this thing called multiple sclerosis. There's this thing called cancer, which has got a nature of its own and is independent of the person who has it. So I have this book, or I have this cup. It's a thing. I can pick it up, I can put it down, I can use it, I can not use it, I can give it away, keep it. When somebody's diagnosed with, say, multiple sclerosis or any illness, they're told by the physicians, here's your disease, this is this thing, it's got, this is what it does, this is what the prognosis is, this is what its course is going to look like. That's assuming that the disease has got a life of its own and it's a thing apart from the person in whom the disease show up. Now, in my conversation with V, what occurred to both of us is that that's not the nature of illness. It's actually a process. That process unfolds in a particular individual. Illness doesn't interrupt your life, it manifests your life. And there's all kinds of scientific evidence to show how illness is not something that shows up all of a sudden. It's a long-term process, very much connected to what happened to you even prenatally, and birth and childhood. and that the identifiable symptoms by the time the diagnosis arrives are only the more explicit manifestations of a long-term process that really has to do with what's happened to you in your life and what dynamics have animated how you relate to yourself and to your life. It's not a theoretical distinction, it's a practical one. Because if disease is a process that manifests your life, it also means that if you gain agency over your life, you can affect the process.
Yes.
And there are so many documented examples, including people that I've talked to in the book, who they changed the process of their life. Their disease naturally changes because the disease is not a thing with a life of its own. And we all know of these people who've been given terminal diagnoses and 30 years later they're still alive. Well, I'm not saying those examples are common, but the very fact that they exist tells us that this idea of disease is a thing is a fantasy. You take somebody like the physicist Stephen Hawking, who was diagnosed with ALS, this thing called ALS, and he was told you got 2 years to live at age 20. And 55 years later or so, he died as the world's most well-known physicist, having made incredible contributions to our understanding of the universe. So clearly there's a process going on there that medical practice doesn't recognize. I should also say here that I have to make a distinction between medical practice and medical science, because science has shown the process and how it works. Medical practice doesn't recognize it. It's a strange dichotomy.
Yeah, it's almost taken 100 years now since quantum mechanics and particle physics and all of this science that essentially pointed to the notion that the world is not fixed.
Right.
That it is not a thing that is unchangeable.
That's right.
But it is dancing and in vibratory interrelationship with itself. And of course, this is speaks to our mutual interest in Buddhism and notions of dependent origination and life as an interconnected web or spontaneously emergent, as in the Taoist tradition. But here we are now 100 years later from some of the greatest discoveries of the early 20th century, just now on the cusp of putting our thumb on all of these fields of emerging study, like epigenetics and neuroplasticity and the microbiome, that constantly show us that life is process, that every interaction between an organism and its environment can be adaptive or maladaptive.
That's right.
And yes, we've heard of some of the more like sensational recoveries, like our friend Anita Moorjani, who had a near-death experience and then all of a sudden went into remission from a very stage 4, what we dub it, cancer. But this doesn't have to be that extreme.
No.
That anyone along any part of their journey can recognize that they're in process and adopt certain kinds of protocols and behaviors and self-work that can be adaptive to that process.
Well, Anita's book, the title is very telling, isn't it? Dying to be me.
Yeah.
And literally what she says is that she had to nearly die to become truly herself, because she discovered, as a result of this direct near-death experience, she had sort of this flash of illumination that she had never been herself all her life. Because in order to fit in with her family and the cultural expectations, she had to give up her sense of herself. So she literally had to die almost to become herself. Now, that's my general observation of chronic illness, is that virtually, not everybody, but virtually everybody with chronic illness. I say not everybody because there are some diseases that are significantly or almost 100% genetically determined.
Right.
One that runs in my family is muscular dystrophy. If you have it, you'll have the disease, regardless of what kind of personality you have.
Yeah, sickle cell.
But those are rare. Very rare in the population. So in most chronic illness, in my work as a family physician and palliative care physician, and later on in addiction medicine, I did notice that the people prone to chronic illness are people that at some point in life, for no fault of their own, had to disconnect from themselves as the impact of traumatic influences.
That scar tissue built up.
Then the disease comes along and very often acts as a wake-up call. And what people often discover is the path back to themselves under the, you might say, compulsion of the illness. And so in that sense, no, I don't recommend that way of learning. And one of the reasons I write the book is so that we can learn these lessons before our body forces us into the kind of illumination that Anita had to experience. But much short of those dramatic and life-threatening conditions, people can pay attention to their bodies and learn what the bodies are trying to tell them and draw the right conclusions. And it's always about, you're not being yourself here. You know, it sounds simplistic, but I've got decades of experience and observation behind it, not to mention multiple studies that tend in the same direction. And again, what's remarkable is the degree to which medical practice almost militantly ignores all that evidence.
One of the most compelling aspects of Gabor's work is his emphasis on the idea that disease is process, not a thing, and the dynamic interplay between one's emotional experiences and one's health outcomes. We exist on a spectrum between ease and disease, and the good news is that there are many ways to tilt the scale toward ease, despite our toxic culture working against us. And in this section, we'll talk about how we cultivate balance and heal within a toxic culture. What are the protocols and the mindsets that can unwind trauma and, by extension, heal our body minds? If illness and disease exist on a spectrum, what is healing?
To look at word origins, it comes from an Anglo-Saxon or German Anglo-Saxon word for wholeness. Then healing is becoming whole again, which means, or I shouldn't say becoming whole again, more accurately probably recognizing our wholeness. Recovery means to find again. Now you ask anybody who's recovered, what did you find? They'll say, I found myself. Which means that that whole self was never lost. It just got obscured and lost to our awareness. So wholeness and healing is the recovery of the awareness of our wholeness. And in that sense, wholeness doesn't always mean cure.
Right.
So the more you realize that you're okay, the more you realize that what happened then doesn't have to define your present and your future.
If you were to be able to give a message to people, to empower them, to give them agency, to every day wake up and move towards healing and away from disease, what would that message look like?
Just to change the language a bit, I cannot give anybody agency, by definition.
Sure.
Okay. I can help them wake up to the potential of agency within themselves. And what I would say to people is that every instance of perceived helplessness and lack of agency on your part, every moment of being carried away by emotions as if a flood had just carried you away. Every instance when something is a bit off and you notice that it is, now rather than dismissing it or judging yourself for it, you got curious about it. Why did I react that way? Not why did I react that way, which is a judgment, but I wonder why I did react that way. I wonder, why did I feel helpless? I'm actually an adult human being. I'm not an infant anymore. So this sense of helplessness that I have. When I have an opinion that I'm afraid to express because I'm afraid people won't like me, Even when a medical doctor, an expert, tells me something that doesn't feel right to me or that I have some questions about, but I don't utter my questions or I don't state my objection, what is holding me back? That's the pathway towards agency. So to me, the pathway towards agency lies through this compassionate curiosity about one's responses and reactions to the world and one's emotions. Just be curious about everything. And that promotes agency in two ways, because first of all, the answers will begin to emerge, but secondly, you'll begin to notice who's the one asking the questions. Well, that's the you that you don't even know existed. So to me, the path to agency lies through curiosity.
Everyone experiences some level of trauma. This can be acute and profound trauma resulting from neglect, abuse, racism, or a horrible accident. It can also be little t trauma, like the constant drip of a culture that tells us that we're not good enough, not pretty enough, not rich enough. We're all living on a spectrum between wholeness and illness, and everyone responds differently to trauma, and that can determine our direction on that spectrum. Are we healing or are we ailing? Now, Gabor reminds us that we do have some degree of agency. We can't change the underlying event, but we can change our emotional relationship to the event. We can reframe the tyranny of the past through self-inquiry and cultivating compassionate curiosity towards our thoughts, emotions, reactions, and beliefs. We can develop praxis that can help us witness the past with greater equipoise and non-attachment. Of course, freedom from our trauma is hard wrought given the nature of culture. And if emotional toxicity weren't enough, we're also navigating a world of chemical toxins in the air, in the water, and in so many commercial products. I talked to the brilliant functional medicine doctor Alejandro Junger about his experience learning to release negative thoughts through meditation and how that led him to develop the Clean program, which is designed to help us detox and heal from many external toxic exposures.
I was, avidly looking for an explanation to the fact that I wasn't really choosing my thoughts; they were just popping in my head, and if I had a choice, I wouldn't be thinking them. So then, who was thinking them? Who was choosing these things to appear in my head, which were so devastating to me? It played with my emotions in such a negative way. So, and I couldn't find an explanation in the DSM um, catalog, of psychiatric diseases, right? So, but every now and then, I used to find a quote that somehow gave me some hope of understanding, and I would go and follow the referrals from where that quote came from. And slowly, I started moving, following these quotes and where they came from. I started moving from the psychiatric section to the psychology section, then to the self-help section, and then I ended up in the Eastern religions and philosophy section, where one day a book fell in my hands, opened up to a section that was titled Meditation, and when I looked in this particular book, the explanation or the definition was the practice by which you are able to calm down the repetitive negative stream of thoughts, the repetitive negative and automatic stream of thoughts, and maybe even able to stop it. And that's when I said, oh my God, how come, first of all, this is not a concept in psychiatry. And second, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I want to silence this broken radio in my head that is driving me. I thought I was going crazy. I thought that I was listening to voices. I didn't know that 99% of the population of the world is having the same experience. Some more negative, some more positive, but even positive continuous thinking is not freedom of thought. It's not presence. It's just a stream of thoughts. The lucky ones or the luckier ones have positive thinking. But that's just the other side of the coin. It's automatic and it's exhausting and it's never stopping and it doesn't let you sleep, whether it's positive or negative. It just happened that mine were really negative. So I started looking for a way to learn how to meditate. And eventually I ended up in an ashram upstate New York in the Catskills, where I had an encounter face to face with the guru in this ashram, Guru Mai. And in this encounter, which now I understand was very special because it was one-on-one, and that doesn't happen too often. She's always followed by hundreds of people. She basically ended up smacking me on my chest and putting me in a state which I understand now as a synopsis or a preview of enlightenment. My body completely dissolved. I was not this. I was everywhere. I was everything. I merged. I read about it now, and it's what Eastern philosophers and Eastern religion teachers called cosmic consciousness. Well, that when they described that was very similar to the experience that I had when she smacked my chest. And when I came back, I understood that that's the possibility that we come to Earth with, to be in that state continuously. And then there are ways to get there, right? And from that day on, my life took a different course, and I stopped wanting to be a famous cardiologist that invented some new cardiac catheterization and balloon technique, which is what I had in mind at that time, to invent some new balloon angioplasty technique, and I focused on becoming thought free and fully present. So I ended up my cardiology fellowship, graduated, took off, and went to live in an ashram in India, in her ashram in India, where I was given the position of medical director of the clinic there that had different functions.
One part of your book and your work that honestly some of my listeners might find somewhat overwhelming, but I promise there's good news on the other side, is the cornucopia of sources of toxicity. Now, you found meditation to address toxic thoughts, for example, like the second verse of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. It says, what is it? Is yoga chitta vritti naroda. Yoga is the progressive stilling of the fluctuations of the mind, right? But I wonder if you could enumerate, just so people can understand, the vast array of sources of toxicity.
The air we breathe, the water we drink and shower with, the medications we consume, of which only 10% are the active ingredients, and then there's all these other chemicals that are put there for coloring, for consistency, to last longer, the cosmetics that we apply on our skin, the toiletries that we use to clean ourselves, the clothing that we wear, the detergents with which we wash those clothes, the furnitures in our home, the paints that we paint our wall with, the plastics that we cover our cars with, that new smell that you get of a new car. This is all off-gassing of plastics. The mattresses we sleep on, in which we spend 30 or more percent of our lives laying down on and breathing the off-gassing of the fire retardants that are constantly emanating into your lungs. But mostly the food-like products that we eat as foods are loaded with chemicals that alone or in combination cause some kind of disruption in your metabolism, in your physiology. They either block hormones, they either activate receptors or block receptors, they damage the intestinal flora, they erode the intestinal wall, they excite the nervous system, both in your intestines and in your skull, and they cause all kinds of havoc that eventually end up forming or manifesting as a diagnosable disease.
Yeah, it's just somewhat overwhelming when I listen to you bullet point all of the sources of toxicity, because we can do our very, very best to align with nature, to eat organic food, to exercise, and to adopt various different protocols to upregulate our immune system, for example. But these toxins are just ubiquitous
Inescapable in the modern world today.
Yeah.
Inescapable. Now, having said that, what you just mentioned is probably the most important thing that we can do. When you start eating real foods and not edible stuff, when you start eating organic, real food, fruits, vegetables, and if you eat animals, then animals that were, caught from the wild, not raised in farms and injected with all kinds of stuff. That is probably the most important aspect of reversing this plane crash that we are in, right? This falling plane heading to a mountain to explode, right? That is the most important aspect of it. So I consider that kind of like the parachute, because when you start with that, the effects are very powerful, very noticeable, very effective, and they lead to paying attention to all the other sources of toxicity.
I hope this episode has articulated the intricate relationship between mind and body and the power of our thoughts and beliefs to influence our physiology. We are not separate, atomized beings. Being human is the total of our biopsychoorganism, conscious or unconscious, in relationship with our environment. We're the entire thing. While we cannot control our genetics, we don't choose our parents, though some of us wish we could, and we certainly cannot control all aspects of our environment, but we do have tremendous agency. Our physiology and psychology are not fixed. We can adopt protocols to better manage our emotional response to external stimuli. As Viktor Frankl famously wrote, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. On our Commune course platform, we offer programs in meditation, breathwork, and mindfulness with brilliant teachers that can help you cultivate that space. You can sign up for a free 14-day trial of Commune membership that grants you full access to more than 130 courses by going to onecommune.com/trial. For more podcasts like this one, subscribe to our YouTube channel or your favorite podcatcher. Okay, that's all from the Commune for today. My name is Jeff Krasnow, and I am here for you.